This segment brought to you by Kansas Regenerative Medicine Center. Your stem cells, your health, your life. Aren't you happy? Here we are again. So, anyway, Veterans Day is coming up, and there are a lot of veterans activities, and I know you've got one that you need to kind of tell us about.
Well, my dear friend Jeanne Mithen marks the graves of the World War I dead at Historic Topeka Cemetery. And so those markers, their bios of these men and one woman, are actually going up today. And I believe they'll be on display through the 21st. So we're going to take a look at some of these that break your heart. They just break your heart. But these are actually people who died during service, some from the flu, some from combat, and other situations. But it's just heartbreaking, but it's so important while we're in the 100th anniversary of World War I, especially relevant these days, it seems, the situation around the world. So this is a really important one, and hope you can get out to Historic Topeka Cemetery and take a look.
That's, if you don't know for sure, that's at 10th in California.
Right. I-70 in California, 10th in California, right there. During the 100th anniversary of the Great War, volunteer Jeanne Mithen has been honoring Topekans who died during their service by posting their photos and a short biography at their grave sites in Historic Topeka Cemetery. Most of these young men and one woman were not combat casualties, but as in most wars, sickness was the greatest enemy. It is proper that we take the time to recall them and their sacrifice. Most were first buried in France and later returned to America. Some, like Henry Walsh, were never returned, and a memorial bears his name. Also, Phillip Billard was a test pilot, and when he died in a plane crash, his family buried his ashes in his grandmother's garden in France. John Oscar Akerstrom died in 1918 from wounds sustained in one of the final battle of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, just a dozen hours before the armistice. Floyd Webster Bailey, born in Agra, Kansas, died in training in September of 1918 of complications from the Spanish influenza and resulting pneumonia at Camp Grant, Rockford, Illinois. Seaman Kenneth Lynde Barber, Foster Raymond Bradfield, William Henry Cummickel, Ralph Raymond Doidge, Robert Thomas Melton, and Virgil Eaton died during training of complications from the Spanish influenza. Frederick Joseph also died from Spanish influenza and rests in the Jewish section without a headstone. Medical Corpsman Harold Rosen Olson died from cerebral spinal meningitis in France, and Frank Asbury Pavey died of TB and measles at Camp Funston. Lyman Rice died from dysentery and pneumonia. Charles Erickson died from pneumonia and shrapnel poison sustained during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. LeRoy Evans was killed in action on August 31st, 1918. Aurie Earnest Fager died from wounds as a result of machine gun fire in November 1918 at a base hospital near the town of Barracourt, France. William Clingy died of pneumonia while training in Texas, January 1919. Ernest Fred Moneypenny was accidentally shot in France. Fay Sarah Freidberg died from disease on December 30, 1918 of complications from the Spanish influenza and resulting pneumonia in Washington, D.C., while she was working with the Casualty Division of the Adjutant General's Office in the War Department. On the Shawnee County Victory Highway Memorial, Fay is recorded as the only Shawnee County woman member of the Department of War to have died in the Great War in the service of the United States. She is buried in the Jewish section of the Historic Topeka Cemetery. Jesse Gilliland died in October 1918 after being gassed and wounded during the opening stages of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. Fred Lloyd Jones died in August 1919 from pneumonia contracted on board ship during his return from his participation in the AEF offensives of the Western Front in France. Theodore Leslie McNeeley was killed in action on September 16, 1918, in a direct hit from a shell on the front line of the most advanced and exposed position being held by the 353rd Infantry during the St. Mihiel Offensive. Kenneth Sutherland was killed in action 17 July 1918 in the Alsace, France. William Swan died from wounds sustained in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive in October 1918. Albert Thompson Jr. died during training in San Antonio in July 1919 of cancer. He had already served one tour of duty in Europe. As we mark Veterans Day, November 11, let us recall their sacrifices and those of their families, and the millions who died around the world in those dark years a century ago.
Buffalo Bill Cody earned his legendary title in Oakley. Bring the family and come celebrate Oakley's pioneering history and unique geography at two sites, the Buffalo Bill Cultural Center and the Fick Fossil Museum. Cody's statue marks his achievements and welcomes visitors to the Cultural Center. The Fick Fossil Museum houses world-class fossils and artifacts. You'll find Oakley at the hub of U.S. Highways 83 and 40 and I-70. Stop for the legend. Stay for the day. Discover Oakley.